Mark and Jennifer Henley seemed like the perfect couple until Mark vanished without a trace, and police found his shoes buried neatly in the backyard. What began as a missing person case quickly spiraled into something darker, revealing secrets hidden just beneath the surface of their quiet suburban life. Mark Henley's disappearance began as a quiet mystery that no one took seriously, at least not at first. On the surface, it seemed like the kind of thing that happened all the time. A grown man, fed up after a heated argument with his wife, walks out and doesn't come back for a few days. People assumed he'd cool off and return eventually. That's what Jennifer Henley told the police when they showed up at her doorstep 2 days after Mark was reported missing. It started on a Monday morning in early November. The air was cold, and the last of the autumn leaves blew across the Henleys' neatly trimmed lawn in Cedar Hill, Tennessee. Mark was supposed to drive to the Nashville airport for a business trip to Atlanta. His suitcase was missing from the closet. His briefcase, laptop, and charger were gone too. But when his office in Atlanta called his sister looking for him 2 days later, she realized something was wrong. Mark was never late. He never missed work. And he never ignored her messages. Jennifer was strangely unfazed when the police knocked on her door. She said she and Mark had argued the night before. Nothing serious, just typical marital tension. She told them he had packed up and left without saying much. Didn't even kiss her goodbye. He was angry, she explained, and she didn't want to push him. When asked why she hadn't reported him missing, she shrugged and said he probably needed space. The officers took notes but didn't press too hard. After all, there were no signs of foul play, and grown men were allowed to leave if they wanted to. But not everyone believed her story. Mark's sister, Claire, was the first to raise alarm. She called the police again, urging them to take the case seriously. She told them that Mark wasn't the kind of person who would just disappear. He was meticulous about everything: his routines, his schedule, his communication. He even texted Claire daily, just to check in. The silence from him was unnatural, and Claire knew something wasn't right. She kept pushing, showing them old messages, calendar reminders, and call logs. The police began to listen. When they started piecing things together, the inconsistencies stood out. Mark's car had been found at the airport, but there was no record of him checking into a flight, buying a ticket, or even entering the terminal. Surveillance cameras showed his car arriving just before sunrise, but the driver was never clearly seen. The person parked the car in long-term parking and walked out of frame. No luggage was visible. Neighbors provided another clue. Several of them recalled hearing shouting from the Henley house late Sunday night. One even said it lasted nearly an hour, unusual for a couple that mostly kept to themselves. Still, no one called the police. Cedar Hill was a quiet suburb. People minded their own business. When investigators asked Jennifer about the argument, her answers felt rehearsed. She insisted it was about money, something Mark had been stressed about for weeks. She claimed he stormed out, slammed the front door, and that was the last she saw of him. Her tone never changed, and her eyes never welled with tears. She told her story the same way every time, as though she'd memorized the script. Officers did a preliminary walkthrough of the home. It looked clean and orderly. Nothing was out of place. But one detective noted the odd absence of personal items. No framed photos of the couple, no signs of Mark's presence beyond a few clothes in the closet. His toothbrush was missing. So were his phone charger and favorite watch. But in the kitchen trash, an officer found something strange: a receipt from a local hardware store dated just 2 days before the argument. It listed bleach, gloves, and a garden trowel. That's when things shifted. The police realized this wasn't just a missing person case. Jennifer's story had too many holes. Her timing didn't line up. And that quiet detachment, the calmness, began to look less like confidence and more like control. They brought in a forensic team to look closer. The search expanded to the entire house and the surrounding yard. That's when they noticed the patch of dirt. It was small, but distinct. Just beside the rose bushes in the backyard, there was a rectangle of soil that didn't match the rest. The grass had been stripped, and the dirt was uneven. Jennifer claimed she had done some gardening, said she wanted to plant something new before winter. But nothing had been planted. The soil was loose, as though something had been buried, then quickly forgotten. Police brought in cadaver dogs. Within minutes, the dogs fixated on that single patch. They scratched at the dirt and barked until officers began to dig. It wasn't deep, just beneath the surface, carefully placed side by side. were Mark Henley's shoes. The kind he wore every day to work. The discovery of Mark Henley's shoes, buried neatly in the backyard, turned a quiet investigation into a full-scale criminal case. They weren't just any shoes. They were the brown leather ones he wore to work nearly every day. Stained with mud and worn down at the heels, they were instantly recognizable. His sister confirmed it without hesitation. So did a neighbor who had seen Mark wearing them just a couple of days before he disappeared. The police were stunned. If Mark had truly left on his own, why would he leave behind his shoes? And not just leave them, but bury them? Jennifer's explanation didn't help her case. She said maybe he was trying to symbolically start over. Maybe he was just angry and irrational. But it didn't make sense. Mark was practical and neat. Friends described him as methodical. If he had been planning to leave, he wouldn't have buried anything in the yard like a child hiding a toy. The placement of the shoes said more than Jennifer realized. They weren't tossed or forgotten. They had been carefully placed in the dirt, side by side, toes pointing the same direction, as though someone had taken time to make them look deliberate. It was the kind of detail that didn't feel spontaneous. The dirt above them was packed down, but not firmly. It looked rushed, done in a hurry, maybe even in the dark. The forensic team went over the yard inch by inch. They used ground-penetrating radar, metal detectors, and scent detection dogs. But beyond the shoes, they didn't find much else in the soil. It became clear to detectives that the shoes weren't meant to hide something. They were meant to confuse, to mislead. A decoy. Or maybe they were a mistake, an overlooked detail in an otherwise carefully crafted lie. Inside the house, officers took their time going room to room. They cataloged everything: furniture, electronics, cleaning supplies, laundry. It was a tidy space, almost too tidy. The bedroom closet had only Jennifer's clothes. Mark's remaining. Shirts and jackets were folded and stacked in a cardboard box, as if someone had started packing them up. But Jennifer had told police she hadn't touched anything since he left. In the garage, more oddities emerged. A set of gardening tools hung neatly on the wall, yet the small trowel listed on the hardware store receipt wasn't there. Investigators asked Jennifer about it. She claimed she must have misplaced it after gardening in the yard. But when they checked the trash bins at the curb, they found the trowel, mud-caked and wiped clean, but still smelling faintly of bleach. Then came the most chilling moment of that phase of the investigation, a blood detection spray test. Luminol revealed faint traces in the hallway leading from the kitchen to the basement door. Tiny droplets, too small to notice with the naked eye, speckled the floorboards. Not enough to suggest a violent outburst, but enough to suggest something had happened. Something that someone had tried to clean up. Jennifer's reaction to all of this was unnerving. She didn't panic. She didn't demand answers. She just kept insisting that Mark had left. Her story never changed. She told it like a script she'd rehearsed too many times. The officers began to feel it was less about what she said and more about what she wasn't saying. One detective requested access to the couple's digital records, emails, phone pings, credit card activity. Mark's phone had stopped transmitting around 10:46 p.m. On the night he disappeared. His last text was a message to Claire about Thanksgiving plans. After that, nothing. His credit cards hadn't been used. His bank accounts remained untouched. No Uber rides. No hotel bookings. No trace of a man planning to skip town. Meanwhile, Jennifer's bank statement told another story. She had withdrawn $800 in cash the day after Mark disappeared. She hadn't mentioned that to anyone. When asked about it later, she claimed she needed the money for groceries and gas. But the amounts didn't add up. The cash was gone, and there were still grocery receipts from the same week paid for by card. As the evidence piled up, it became clear this wasn't a case of a man walking away. This was a disappearance crafted to look like one. But the small things, the shoes, the missing trowel, the faint stains on the floor, told a different story. With probable cause growing stronger, the lead investigator filed for a full search warrant of the house and property, this time including forensic analysis of the basement. He suspected that if something had happened to Mark Henley, the truth was buried much closer than anyone wanted to believe, and they were about to find out just how close. The basement of the Henley home became the next focus of the investigation, and it didn't take long for the space to raise suspicions. At first glance, the basement appeared normal, cool, quiet, and unfinished, with a washer and dryer tucked into one corner and plastic storage bins stacked neatly against the far wall. A workbench held a few common tools. The lighting was dim, with only one flickering bulb dangling from the ceiling. But to the trained eyes of the forensic team, small details stood out. The first was the floor. Concrete, stained in places from years of use. But in one area near the far corner, the surface was noticeably cleaner, almost too clean. When investigators looked closer, they noticed faint drag marks in the dust, like something heavy had been pulled across the floor. The concrete beneath that area was slightly discolored and smelled faintly of bleach. What truly caught their attention was the large, empty rectangle outlined on the floor. Dust and grime covered the rest of the basement. But this one section was spotless. It was exactly the size of an area rug. When officers asked Jennifer about it, she said she had taken the rug to the cleaners. But when pressed for a receipt or the name of the business, she claimed she couldn't remember. She even changed her story slightly, later saying she might have thrown it away instead. A neighbor soon stepped forward with a troubling account. On the morning Mark was reported missing, just before sunrise, he had seen Jennifer dragging something large and rolled up into the back of her SUV. It was wrapped in plastic and taped at the ends. He assumed it was a rug or maybe a piece of furniture. At the time, he didn't think much of it, but now he wasn't so sure. This single sighting changed everything. Investigators now had a timeline. Mark had vanished sometime between late Sunday night and early Monday morning. Jennifer had claimed he walked out after an argument, but now it seems she may have removed something from the house while it was still dark, before anyone could notice. The police reviewed surveillance footage from traffic cameras, gas stations, and businesses in the area. At 4:17 a.m., Jennifer's SUV was captured on a camera at a remote gas station just outside Cedar Hill. She hadn't mentioned this trip to anyone. The footage showed her alone, wearing dark clothes, her hair pulled back. The vehicle's back seat appeared full, though the footage was too grainy to make out details. She didn't buy gas. She didn't go inside. She sat in the car for nearly 10 minutes before driving off toward the woods. This drive, paired with the neighbor's account and the missing rug, painted a darker picture. Jennifer was no longer a wife waiting for her husband to return. She was now the primary suspect in a possible homicide. The police expanded their search beyond the home and yard, focusing on areas near the route she had taken that early morning. But even with all of this, they still didn't have a body. That lack of a final, undeniable piece of evidence made things complicated. Without it, they couldn't charge Jennifer with murder. But they had enough for other charges: tampering with evidence, obstruction of justice, and making false statements. To law enforcement, Jennifer was arrested quietly at her home. She didn't resist. During her initial interviews, she remained calm and composed, never straying from her story. She claimed the trip early that morning was just her trying to clear her head, to get away from the stress. She said she drove aimlessly, not remembering where she went. When asked about the missing rug again, she now claimed she threw it out at a roadside dumpster, but couldn't recall the exact location. Investigators didn't believe her, but without a body, they couldn't prove anything more yet. Still, they pressed forward. A specialized search unit was dispatched to the wooded area where Jennifer's SUV had last been seen. They knew what they were looking for. It took 2 days of searching through dense trees, thorny brush, and uneven terrain. Eventually, a team found something hidden beneath a thick layer of leaves and branches in a ravine: a large, tightly rolled rug, wrapped in black plastic and duct tape. Inside, they found hair, blood, and clear signs of an attempt to clean up. A crime scene. Lab analysis later confirmed the blood belonged to Mark Henley. The case had taken another dark turn. Police still didn't know exactly what had happened in that basement, but they knew Mark had died, and Jennifer had tried to cover it up. The rug had been hidden, the shoes buried, the truth stretched and twisted. But now, the lies were starting to fall apart. And with every layer they peeled back, it became clear they were inching closer to a much more chilling truth. The discovery of the rug in the woods outside Cedar Hill was the moment the case shifted from suspicion to near certainty. Hidden deep in a ravine, the rug was heavy, soaked in dampness from the earth, and wrapped in black plastic secured with layers of duct tape. Investigators carefully unwrapped it, revealing large stains that had bled through the fibers. The scent of bleach and decay lingered, unmistakable and sharp, Forensic testing confirmed the blood was Mark Henley's. Hair found inside the rug matched his DNA, and fibers from the basement carpet, identical in color and texture, were embedded in the cloth. Despite the harsh cleaning agents, enough biological evidence remained to prove that Mark had bled heavily, and likely fatally, on that rug. The location of the rug was no coincidence. It was along the same route Jennifer's SUV had taken during her early morning drive. This discovery gave investigators what they needed to deepen their focus, but not yet to charge her with murder. The absence of a body still posed a challenge. Prosecutors were hesitant to pursue a homicide case without it, knowing how often juries demand concrete proof. Still, they pressed forward with obstruction and evidence tampering charges. Jennifer remained calm throughout the process, as if she still believed she could outlast the investigation. While she awaited her hearing under house arrest, police continued to build their case. They retraced every step from the night Mark disappeared. A more detailed forensic analysis of the basement revealed something earlier teams had missed: tiny traces of blood inside the drain near the laundry sink. A UV light showed streaks leading from the spot where the rug had been to the drain, as if someone had tried to wash the floor clean. A timeline began to form. The argument neighbors heard on Sunday night likely marked the start. Investigators believed that sometime between 10:30 p.m. and 1 a.m., Mark was struck, possibly with a heavy object, and bled onto the rug. Afterward, his body was wrapped, the floor scrubbed, and the rug removed. Around 4 a.m., Jennifer placed it in her SUV and drove out of town, dumping the evidence in the woods. Still, the question remained: where was Mark's body? Investigators expanded their search radius. Drones were used to scan the woods and nearby lakes. Cadaver dogs combed through abandoned buildings and fields. Search teams covered dozens of square miles, but nothing turned up. Weeks passed, and pressure mounted. Public interest in the case grew. News outlets followed every move, every court appearance, every twist. Then, something unexpected happened. A retired officer named Grant Holloway came forward. He had worked on the initial walkthrough of the Henley property, and something had been nagging at him. He remembered seeing a stack of lumber piled behind the detached garage. Beneath it, barely visible, was a metal handle. At the time, it hadn't seemed important. But now, with the investigation stalled and no body found, he decided to say something. Police returned to the house with another warrant and headed straight to the garage. The lumber was still there, now slightly weathered from rain and time. Underneath, hidden beneath leaves and debris, they found what Holloway had remembered: a rusted metal hatch set into the ground. It hadn't been opened in years. Jennifer had never mentioned it. With bolt cutters and crowbars, the team pried it open. A narrow staircase descended into darkness, leading to what appeared to be an old root cellar. The air was cold and damp, thick with mold and something else, something foul. Flashlights cut through the darkness. The walls were lined with crumbling stone. In the farthest corner, beneath a pile of tarp and broken shelves, something bulky was tucked away. When they pulled the tarp back, the horror was confirmed. Mark Henley's body was there, partially decomposed, still bound with rope. The medical examiner later determined he had died from a single blunt force trauma to the head. He had likely been killed instantly. The attempt to hide the body so close to home was a risk, but one that, for a time, had almost worked. With the body recovered, everything came together. The blood in the basement, the hidden rug, the buried shoes, all led to this moment. Jennifer Henley was arrested again, this time for first-degree murder. She showed no emotion as the charges were read. No tears, no confusion, only silence. The truth had finally surfaced, buried beneath her lies and just feet from where she had continued her life, pretending nothing had happened. News of Mark Henley's body being found beneath the garage spread quickly, sending shockwaves through the small town of Cedar Hill. What had begun as a quiet missing persons case now stood revealed as a cold, calculated murder. For weeks, Jennifer Henley had maintained her story, that her husband left after an argument and simply vanished. But the evidence told a much different tale. The discovery of Mark's body in the old root cellar beneath their own property was both horrifying and surreal. Investigators were stunned not just by the location, but by how carefully it had been concealed. The cellar wasn't accessible from the main house and was partially buried under rotting wood and debris. Most people didn't even know it existed. It hadn't been mentioned in the original home inspection reports, and Jennifer had never acknowledged it during any of her interviews. But she knew it was there, and she had used it. The condition of the body told its own story. Mark had suffered a single blunt force trauma to the back of the head, consistent with the kind of wound inflicted by a hammer or similar object. He had been wrapped in sheets, tied with nylon rope, and left in the cellar with bags of lye placed around him, likely in an attempt to speed decomposition. Despite these efforts, enough forensic evidence remained for the medical examiner to confirm not only the cause of death, but also an estimated time. Late Sunday night, around the same time neighbors had reported hearing the shouting. With the physical evidence now aligned with the timeline, prosecutors were ready to move forward. Jennifer Henley was charged with first-degree murder, abuse of a corpse, and obstruction of justice. She was taken into custody without incident. At her arraignment, she pleaded not guilty. Her defense team claimed there was no direct evidence, placing her at the scene of the crime during Mark's time of death, and that the entire case was circumstantial. But the weight of the details made that defense difficult to believe. The heart of the case were the mistakes Jennifer had made. The shoes buried in the yard, the blood missed during cleaning, the neighbor's eyewitness account, and the drive caught on a grainy surveillance camera. Any one of them might have seemed insignificant alone. Together, they formed a chain that pointed directly to her. Prosecutors argued that the murder wasn't spontaneous. It had signs of planning, even if rushed. The purchase of cleaning supplies. Days earlier, the story Jennifer repeated without change. The effort to hide the body so close to home, in a place only she had access to. The most chilling aspect, they said, was how ordinary everything had seemed afterward. Jennifer had gone on with her life. She continued to work remotely, attended church, walked her dog. For weeks, she lived just feet above where Mark's body lay, answering calls from his family, accepting their concern with a calm, even tone. The trial began in early spring, 5 months after Mark's death. The courtroom was packed each day with townspeople, journalists, and members of the Henley family. The prosecution presented their case methodically. Forensics experts, crime scene investigators, and digital analysts all took the stand. One by one, they painted a picture of a woman who had grown resentful, who had been caught in a marriage she no longer wanted, and who, in one final argument, had decided she would rather eliminate her problem than leave it. The defense tried to poke holes in the timeline and cast doubt on the evidence, but it was an uphill battle. The jury deliberated for just 2 days before returning with a unanimous verdict, guilty on all counts. Jennifer Henley was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. After the trial, Mark's sister Claire spoke publicly for the first time. She thanked investigators for not giving up and for treating her brother's disappearance seriously when so many others had assumed the worst about him instead of the truth about Jennifer. She described Mark as thoughtful, dependable, and someone who deserved better than to become part of a murder story that would one day make headlines. In the end, what unraveled Jennifer Henley's carefully constructed lie wasn't some dramatic piece of evidence or a confession. It was the quiet details, the small things she had overlooked in her desperation to appear normal. The buried shoes, the missing rug, the camera that caught a car on a forgotten road. Mark hadn't vanished. He had never even left. He was always there, just beneath the surface, waiting for the truth to be uncovered.